The Janitor and the Lunch Lady by LeBron Keener. Dennis was quiet. He was a shy boy and didn't make friends very easily. The entire fifth grade class seemed to avoid him unless they were playing a cruel joke, which happened often. He was short for his age and couldn't see very well without his glasses. The thick lenses he wore caused him to be referred to by the other children as Four Eyes. Being withdrawn, he usually kept his head down as he passed the badgering kids in the hall. When he stopped at his locker, there was sometimes a sheet of notebook paper sticking to it saying things like "loser" or "eat crap and die, Four Eyes." He would simply crumple the paper up and throw it away, avoiding the sneers of the other children as he walked to class. One day, as he passed a group of boys much taller than himself, one of them stuck a foot out in front of Dennis, causing him to trip and fall. The hallway erupted into laughter while he lay on the floor embarrassed with his books scattered about. The janitor, who was pushing a mop bucket, stopped and watched as Dennis gathered his books around him, but he wasn't laughing. He was an old man who never smiled, and much like Dennis, he wasn't very talkative at all. He mostly concentrated on his work while the children ran about, creating more messes for him to clean up. After Dennis stood up and brushed himself off, the janitor shook his head in disgust and continued pushing the squeaky mop bucket down the hall. The next morning, Dennis walked through the double doors in the front of the school and found the faculty members quietly talking to one another. Police officers wandered about the building speaking to random children in the hall. Other than the police being present, the morning seemed to be like any other as Dennis went to class. The teacher began class by asking the children if any of them had seen Justin Green. She explained to them that he never came home from school and no one knew where he was. Dennis remembered Justin Green as the boy who had tripped him in the hallway the previous day. Nobody in the classroom had seen or heard from him. After the school day was over, the children passed through the halls, making their way to the schoolyard where a line of school buses waited along the street. On his way out, Dennis noticed a poster in the window of one of the doors. It had Justin Green's name and picture on it underneath the word "missing" in bold black letters. The picture of the boy seemed to be staring from the poster, begging for help. With the hallway empty and silent, the janitor began changing out the garbage can liners. He looked up at Dennis, who was already walking outside. The same poster began appearing all over town as the search for Justin Green continued. A week had passed, and still there was no sign of the boy. His sobbing parents were on the local news, pleading with anyone who had any information on the whereabouts of their son. The following week, Dennis sat in the cafeteria eating lunch when Tabitha Henshaw and Julie Meadows sat down beside him. Tabitha, who sat to the left of him, was a golden-haired girl who had already begun to mature. Julie, who had taken the seat to the right, had dark hair and was slightly less mature than Tabitha. They both wore huge amounts of makeup, which made them appear older than what they really were. They were two of the most popular girls in the whole school, and were very careful to ignore any kid below their own self-proclaimed social status. He looked at them both, wondering what was going on. Dennis always sat alone quietly in the cafeteria while the other kids ate in groups, talking loudly. Tabitha smiled briefly before smacking her hand down in Dennis's tray of food. She grabbed a handful of spaghetti and smeared it on the boy's white shirt, while Julie poured the carton of milk into his lap. Dennis sat silently. Julie was laughing under her breath, but Tabitha was scowling at him. After wiping her spaghetti-covered hand on the back of his shirt, Tabitha returned with Julie to the table where their friends were watching and laughing. Dennis dropped his head low, staring at the mess of food on his clothes. The lunch lady saw the entire incident and felt terrible for the boy. He was still looking down as she walked out holding a fresh tray of food, putting it on the table in front of him. She was a sweet lady, short and quite plump. She was always smiling anytime Dennis had seen her. As she removed the first tray and wiped off the table, she told him to eat and then to go wash up the best he could before returning to class. The janitor, who was quietly eating his lunch in the corner, watched unfavorably as Tabitha Henshaw and Julie Meadows left the cafeteria and went back to class. The next morning, the principal stood in front of the big double doors, directing all the children to go straight to the auditorium. As Dennis walked down the center aisle, he found a seat and sat down. The janitor had been mopping the stage floor when the principal walked up to the podium. He leaned on the mop and looked at the principal, who was getting ready to speak. After gaining the attention of the children, he explained that Tabitha Henshaw and Julie Meadows were missing. He ordered everyone to go directly home after school and to report any strangers to either himself or a teacher. The windows in the double doors now contained 3 missing posters. The pictures of Justin Green, Tabitha Henshaw, and Julie Meadows seemed to watch everyone passing through the door, pleading for help. Days passed, and the 3 children remained unaccounted for. The mood within the school grew dark as the children were constantly reminded to go straight home and to not talk to strangers. The local police chief visited each class and explained to everyone the importance of being aware of one's surroundings, refusing candy from strangers, and when to call 911. The children kept to themselves, just as Dennis had always done, getting their books, closing their lockers, and walking quietly to their respective classes. The old janitor even had less to do, because there was very little horseplay and no one was having paper fights in the hallway. As Dennis got in line in the cafeteria, the janitor walked up and stood behind him. Dennis watched him nervously. They both got themselves a carton of milk and placed silverware and napkins on their trays while the line moved slowly on to the serving window. The old janitor looked down at the boy with a slight grin appearing on his face. It was the first time Dennis had ever seen the old man smile. The lunch lady scooped steamy hot stew out of the pot and onto their trays. Dennis watched as she smiled at him and winked. The stew smelled delicious. It was full of potatoes, carrots, and corn, all cooked up with big, tender chunks of roasted meat. that was slowly simmered and seasoned to perfection. Dennis took a seat and began to eat the stew. It was the tastiest stew he had ever had. And the best part was that while he slowly chewed that delicious juicy meat, no one bothered him at all.